Turtles all the way down. I'm Jake, sometimes Cenk. Last time I was talking about these cycles or processes within me that are kind of, at times at odds with each other. At times they're good at cooperating with each other. And I guess this is kind of the project that I'm engaged in, which is to try and get these aspects, these sides, these processes, these parts of me to work together, to effectively dance together. And I think that is what results in being good human being, an effective system, an effective complex organism, which in itself is kind of an ecological system of parts. And, once you've got a handle on looking at the self as an entity that's made up of subsets and subsystems and nested systems and overlapping systems, then, we can take a step out and think about, well, how does this system then connect with other systems outside of this scale? And some obvious ones come to mind. And I think the most obvious one that comes to mind is your mother. That seems to be kind of an unusual situation of nested systems, so much that, within the first 9 months or thereabouts, during the pregnancy, you and your mother are essentially a single system. There's a part within the mother that's growing. They're sharing the body systems. You're sharing the food. The sensory inputs are coming in and out. It's pretty much like being a single entity that is sprouting a branch in a way. And once the birth takes place, there's kind of a split. And what was a single system now becomes two discrete systems, or so we call them. And, and essentially their histories start to diverge at that point. Much like if you think about that transporter paradox that we talked about, when somebody is made a copy and transported to another planet, which one is the real person? Well, they're both up to that point. It's a single system, and after that point, it's two systems that diverge, but they share a common history up to that point. And in the case of the mother and child, the common history is very deeply rooted. It's in the body systems are entirely meshed. There is no mind systems at play at that point. As we said, it's not really until the child grows to around the age of 2 where it starts to develop these abstract mind systems within the set that is called you, that becomes kind of this abstract, ethereal realm of ideas, part of you, that kind of floats around your system. It's not something you kind of point to. And this is why I kind of refer to them as kind of like cyclones. It's kind of a spinning swirl of activity, a kind of a storm of processes going on. And in such a way that it's not clearly defined what the outer limits of it are, but that it's kind of a process of effects, and these are loops of activities, these patterns, these behaviors, these strange loops, as someone called them recently. Now with the mother, it's kind of an unusually integrated system. But once that child is born, it starts to develop some closer connections with perhaps the father that's around, or other parent stand-ins of whatever kind. You've got brothers and sisters, if they happen to be there, other family members. And there's kind of a coalescing of these body systems. There's affection, there's attraction, there's attention, there's all kinds of things that work together. There's feeding, there's bonding, everything that goes on during that time kind of interconnects your system as you're growing up with the systems of those people around you. So your family is obviously a very close example of this, and there's kind of a close meshing that can result from that. And, that's when we say that we're very much defined by the people that we're around. And in particular, when you're a child, it seems like a lot of early processes, patterns, cycles, loops are begun. And as a result, a lot of what comes after are kind of built on these. It's kind of like you think about, the early computer systems that were based on a DOS operating system. And what they did was then built another operating system on top of that, which I guess would have been Windows. And you can go on top of that and build apps on top of that. But everything kind of roots back to that basic operating system. And in much the same way, the cycles and loops that you start when you're young, when you're connected with the people around you, it's no surprise that it has such a profound effect on how you develop as a person, what you become later on in life. And, we can go into all kinds of, and maybe I will in future episodes, of how you, the individual, so-called individual, being made up of these parts that are kind of swimming and working together and dancing, how you, that individual, then, interacts and swims and swirls and storms with other so-called individuals. And the special case that I brought out is the mother and the family. And it seems like there's another special case that kind of is on my mind lately, and that's the special case of a so-called mate. There is an other that at some point in your life might come to take on a very pronounced and deep connection, more so than others around you. And that's clearly obvious, and you see it all around you. When people connect in such a way that they want to be together all the time, maybe nest their projects together, and basically function together over time more and more, as if it's a single system. And we call that a family, whether it's just two people, whether there are children involved or not. This kind of a close enmeshing that comes together, we call a new family forming. And there's something interesting about the connection of, I'm going to speak about my situation again, the connection between the cycles that have arisen from my connection to my mother, which was obviously inevitable in a very physical sense. For 9 months, you're in there. And even if you were separated from your mother at that point, so that no exchange of experience continued after that, there would still be a great deal of connection, influence, ripples, behavioral patterns that might result, all kinds of things that come out later based on that close connection that went on for 9 months. And, it's springing from growing in the body. Obviously, it includes some cycles that are brought in from the father in this case, and what the DNA is doing is basically getting these swirls together, and these swirling body of information comes together to create another creature, which eventually develops a mind and becomes you, and then tries again to get those parts within them to work together. And once they feel like they might have figured it out, and I'm kind of getting close to that, and maybe that's why I'm starting to look at mating and what we call the modern equivalent of that, dating, which is a strange word, and I don't know what to do with that word. I'm not sure if I'm doing it, but lately I've been kind of going out and I guess being open to having more and different kinds of women in my life. And it's been kind of an interesting experience the last couple of years. And it kind of brings out this, this unease, discrepancy, non-cooperative way that goes on within me to, maybe to select a mate, or to be attracted to a certain person. And in my case, there doesn't seem to be any ambiguity. In my case, it's a woman that I'm interested in. And I guess I think I'm starting to realize that what I had thought was, my what I'm attracted to, what I prefer, is becoming more apparent to me that it was part of, cycles that are not necessarily blending with me in an effective dance. For example, there's all this talk in popular psychology and everywhere else about how the mother and the experience of how my experience with my mother would affect how I'm going to connect with women when I get older. And that's got to be the case, right? I mean, there's this interesting thing I noticed. Again, this is on a psychedelic trip, is when a lot of these things become a little clearer to me. I had realized that there was a particularly, a lonely part of a winter when I was feeling, I don't know what it was. I tend to call these kind of things anxiety. Who knows, whatever you call it, there's kind of an unease within. And I realized that when this intense unease just kind of set upon me, sometimes it just came out of the blue. For whatever reason, it might have been triggered by an event that happened in front of me. It could have been because I was watching something happen. It could have been a thought that crossed my mind. That when this unease came upon me, I realized with a little bit of deeper perception that what had been going around what had been going on in the background systems of my thinking and feeling was that there was kind of this intense reaching out for a comfort and a comforting of a woman. To be honest, that's kind of what popped into my head and mind and my feelings. It's like, I just kind of, reached out for some kind of comforting. And I think that clearly probably has a lot to do with maybe when you were a child. And when you initially first had feelings like that, basically the only solution at that time is to reach out for your caregiver. In my case, it's my mother at the time. And this kind of reliance and this kind of cycle then starts. So each time I feel that, I kind of this notion just kind of pops into my system that I need a woman to soothe me. And I realized that this was kind of going on inside of me, but not necessarily something that I was aware of. And in this way, so if you ask me, hey, Jake, what are you looking for in a woman? I would, probably spell out a few different things that I tend to be attracted to. And an interesting pattern started to come out. I mean, I would probably go on at length about the importance of, things like intelligence and rationality and calm and all that other stuff. And, curiosity and all kinds of things that I think might relate to the mind more than the body. And but what was interesting is that by my actions, by my behaviors, I tended not to necessarily select partners that way. More often than not, it's the body reactions that kind of attract you quickly to somebody, and before you know it, you're kind of in this loop. You're kind of in this, two storms meshing together in certain ways, and before you know it, you're kind of a system together, and you're kind of entangled in a way. And what I'm noticing more consciously as I, step back and look at myself and my behaviors and my patterns, I see that, I think I'm probably more, rather than seeking the things that I say I'm seeking in a woman, I think most of the time I'm probably, I don't know, you call it subconsciously if you want, unconsciously if you want, in terms of in that language and that nomenclature, I'm seeking probably more to do with comfort. I'm probably seeking security and ease and, I guess pleasure is a part of it. All of these things that are very similar in some sense, to and must be influenced by these early feelings of reaching out for the comfort of a woman. So how much is that impacting my love life? It must be a great amount. It's kind of inevitable that that's going to influence, my behaviors, my choices, where I end up, with who I end up. And these days, what I'm trying to do is, I guess, step out a little bit more, be a little bit more conscious of it, maybe think or give a little bit more of the reins to my mind to look at this and say, okay, don't just jump in, when it feels right in certain ways. and think about what's going on. But you can do this too much, as I did in the past, or you can do it in a balanced way, which is what I'm trying to do now. But in this particular case, and I was saying earlier, maybe in the previous podcast, I'm kind of leaning towards giving more authority to my mind to make these decisions. But what my mind is figuring out as it looks at this system that is me and how it reacts and integrates with other systems that we call women, in my case, I find that I think I don't need to look down upon these body connections as somehow lesser, that they may, and in my case, maybe that's what I need. Maybe I need to put less of a attention on the meshing of mind systems and putting more of an attention on the meshing of body systems. And another interesting thing in terms of what you might be attracted to. Sometimes, a couple of friends and I, we basically making up stuff and coming up with theories. We tended to come upon this understanding that, in my case, I tended to be, I guess more often than not, attracted to women that on the surface are different than my mother. So I don't know if there's some kind of a reaction at play that's unconscious that's kind of steers you towards something that is different. And there might be, some people say that that's kind of a built-in feature of our evolutionary processes, in that it's a healthier for the gene pool to be attracted to someone that is somewhat different than you, so that there's kind of a more of a variation in your in the two systems coming together, so that the resulting being that you create will have an advantage. And that might be true. So I realize that there are certain, I guess, biases, you could call them, at play within me that are kind of moving me this way or that way in terms of how I relate to women in my life. And one of the things you can look at is the biases of attraction. There are many of these cycles going on in the background. And if you think about in terms of like the species-wide perspective, and you can think of, in terms of seeing it from that perspective, you can say that there might be, for example, this bias towards novelty. For the health of the species as a whole, this kind of seems like a cycle and a pattern that gets built into the processes over time to ensure that there's enough, variety and novelty in the mixing of the genes. There is probably a bias in some sense, however you want to define it, towards health. There seems to be very much a commingling of our estimations of beauty and our estimations of health. They tend to go together quite often. And there's reasons for that. As I said, from a species level perspective, for reproductive purposes, for example, it's a great signal that reproduction is possible if you have a healthy mate. And we have these kind of interesting capacities that are mostly our bodies seem to have. That is, we look at something without much thought or without even a microsecond. We tend to make these calculations about curves and ratios, and we analyze and we decide, or our body decides that, oh, I like that. And so that's one way to do it. But there's also a whole bunch of cultural systems and cycles at play that, create biases within me. So, for example, there are certain types, as people say, or looks that, one gets attracted to that might have something to do with the way your culture around you enhances or magnifies certain looks. So, the simplest way to think about this is, you have these like Brigitte Bardot in the 60s, and is a beautiful woman in the public eye. The whole world sees her. And then it's not surprising that conceptions of beauty might, start to be entrenched and in a sense reinforced by the examples that are out there, or like Denzel Washington, a male example. People can point to them as examples of beauty that are attractive, and as part of the cultural processes at play, this becomes kind of ingrained within the behaviors of the individuals, whether they realize it or not. Also in culture, you have certain biases towards, like when I'm, I guess my culture tells me that I need to, be engaged with someone who is maybe of a similar educational level or a status level or what have you, all these cultural, social games at play. So those are all going on. Also, my body has various biases that are maybe somewhat obvious in the sense that if I'm with a woman and I notice that I feel good when I'm around her, emotionally or physically, that is, the experience is pleasing to me, then the body develops a bias towards that kind of a feeling. Will develop a bias towards a person that gave you those feelings, and also it's going to develop a bias towards people that remind you of that person, that look like that person, that act like that person, that talk like that person. So you have all these things going on inside you that none of them are really kind of an objective way that we can use to say, oh, that's beautiful, or that's for me. There's really no objective way to decide that, but there's a whole bunch of interplay of all these cycles that are going on within your body, within your culture, within kind of a meta process of the species going through. And, I was just thinking about this, how the body feels good around another person. And, that's kind of in a couple of ways. So emotionally, that could mean that you're maybe laughing or you're calm around this person, or maybe you're excited around this person. Maybe you prefer, and some people prefer calm or some people prefer exciting. Physically, the body obviously reacts to things like, you're eating food that you're enjoying, you're having sex, your senses are being appealed to. And what's really interesting is kind of touch seems to function at the nexus of both of these, emotionally and physically. Touch, and in particular in my case, seems to be a very important way to, to reinforce, to decide, to understand, to choose what I like. It's like touch seals it. It's both emotional and physically a way for the body to decide what it likes. Now, how is this related to the conversation that I had? I'm not sure. I wanted to talk about how, after figuring out your own cycles within that, you connect with other people and other systems that we call other people. But I guess I'm kind of getting, bogged down into this notion of how I connect with a woman in a mating type situation, and that's okay. I guess I'll get to the other things, other ways that we mesh cycles in other episodes. So yeah, as I said, this conversation that's coming up was with Anthea Foyer. Great conversation. We did start talking about connecting with people, social networks, social media, how we tend to, as people in this, our current age, a lot of us are isolated in one way, but we're also much more connected than we used to be. Maybe more isolated in the physical sense, but less isolated in the the mental sense, because you're connecting abstractly to people over internet communication systems rather than being across the room from them, where touch, for example, is not necessarily possible. Smells, pheromones. There's all kinds of bandwidth that goes on when you're with somebody in a room together that's going to be somewhat diminished when you are in, for example, a virtual reality realm. And this is going to be interesting for us to figure this all out and see if it's even noticed or what's missing and how we're going to all deal with that. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Talk soon. Do you like the red
I do.
sock on the microphone? Someone said that it made us look like we're clowns with our noses where the microphone should be.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Thanks for coming in.
No problem.
Yeah. I guess I've only talked to you once before this, but recently I noticed we're Facebook friends now.
Yep.
And I was just remarking that you seem to have one of the best Facebook feeds that I see come across on my feed. Where are you getting all these great articles and information? Are you seeking it out? Or are you reposting? What?
It's mostly through the people I know. I feel
Yeah.
incredibly lucky. I just have the best people on and offline in my world. Because I've had a few people say that to me before, that they like what I post. And it's really mostly just coming to me rather than me going to find it.
Well, I mean, lately I've been actually trying to stay away from Facebook a little bit. I've noticed, I think like a lot of people, that it tends to stress you out as much as it does inform you. Are you finding that? Because it seems like you spend quite a bit of time on there. So
Yeah, I would like to spend less time. I find I get a little, not obsessive, just it's sort of habitual. But I definitely take breaks, and I definitely would like to spend less time on there. Again, I'm sort of lucky because, of course, I see all the stressful stuff on there, but I feel like I'd like to see other people's feeds because I don't think mine has as much terrible things as other people's. And I find that the people that I know have really interesting conversations and thoughts, and they don't tend to be as kind of quick to judge. So it's kind of a nice place to be. I just would like to be on there a little bit less.
Yeah, but I've also been noticing lately, I don't know, when I upgraded my iOS software, everything just seems to get progressively slower and more complicated and more convoluted, and each of the apps seems to get more syrupy and slow, and it just it's kind of the effort required seems to be more and more to keep up. I mean, I feel like just running away and living like a monk for a while.
Definitely. Well, one of the things I find the most interesting about a lot of people I know that are kind of in the digital world, there seems to be this vein, which I'm probably included in, that are sort of like digital hippies. So it's like they go so far with digital, but then they're extremely opposite the other way. So they'll completely take off for, months at a time, or their life will be online and then living on an island somewhere. And so I'm finding that people really having these kind of extremes, or they'll really be involved in digital and then just completely quit and then go and become a potter somewhere.
Right.
Which is great.
Sounds appealing.
Yeah.
It's like on or off. So the digital is something that you focus on.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of in your job description in a way, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So what does that mean to you? What are you? You're looking at the future, I guess, or the present?
All of the above.
Okay.
So it's actually kind of funny because I started out, so growing up and then through my first degree, I was completely non-digital. I did not give a crap. I didn't want anything to do with anything computery. And then I kind of realized that I could use it kind of like magic, and that made it more fun to me. So I do a lot of installation work, and I do a lot of artwork that's around getting people to communicate with each other. And I also like to play with people's imaginations, and I found that the digital could do that. And so I started down that vein. Part of it was also that I ended up taking this master's degree, and I'm not sure how closely I read the syllabus for the program. And so I knew it was digital, but I don't think I knew how much it was digital until I got there. And then I was like, oh, I guess I'm doing this. And so...
Where was that?
That was at Goldsmiths in London. Yeah, so it was a good school.
Claire went there briefly, I think.
Cool. So I started that way, and then I kind of have realized over the years just how powerful it is, and how I think in terms of communication and information and storytelling, that's where I get really excited about it. So I've sort of always been at it at an interesting angle. Which has been great. I've never been I'm not a programmer. I'm not that side of it. I'm really much more around the culture of digital and the communication of digital.
And you were at CFC for a while, Canadian Film Centre, right?
I was, yeah.
So that has an interesting angle on things as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I ran a residency program there for several years. And all of the residents were amazing and came from such different backgrounds, and their work was and is incredible. And I think one of the coolest things that I see, although frustrating for most of the residents, is that there's about a 7 to 10 year lag between the projects they came up with and them being in the marketplace now.
Wow.
Yeah.
7 to 10 years.
Yep. It's quite long.
Was that longer than one might expect, I guess, is it?
It is.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that I mean, they are just very interesting, forward-thinking people that came through there. It's a very particular breed of person that likes that kind of a place.
Mm-hmm.
And then also it takes a while to get things into the market. So it's been really interesting watching, like their ideas come to fruition.
So those people tended to continue on with the project that they started there, and it came to fruition after they left CFC. Is that typically what happens, or?
Typically, unfortunately, what happens is they have the idea, they ran with it for a few years, and then, financially, life-wise, energy-wise, you can only pursue something for so long. Yeah. And then they'd kind of often move on to something else. Some people stayed with it, but most people moved on to something else, and then someone else or the world picked up on whatever they were interested in, and it's now grown that way. Right. So unfortunately, it's not those people that are getting the fame and fortune for it. But...
yeah, it seems like a lot of people in the arts, whether it's that kind of art or filmmaking or music, it seems like they really kind of grind it out for a few years, and when they have a lack of success, a lot of people give up. Mm-hmm. And the ones that don't, some of them actually make it, but they all seem like they're on kind of a quixotic adventure. It seems like such a long shot to make a living in art of any kind. Yeah. Are you finding that, you're an artist.
I'm an artist, but I don't make a living at being an artist.
That's,
yeah.
Would you rather be doing that full time?
I ask myself that a lot. I think it's sort of a struggle with a lot of the artists I know. I think there's very few that entirely make a living off their art. I struggle. On one hand, it would be amazing to just have an enormous sunny studio and show up every day and really work. And one of the things I get concerned about having a day job is that I haven't had time to really work on my craft and really work on that. But at the same time, most artists don't have financial security, so that is very stressful. So I still make work, and it's interesting to me, at least. So I seem to right now be balancing it. It would be nice, I was in my retirement, to have a big studio.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But it's such a shame that we have to wait till we retire to do the things we want. I guess there's all this talk these days about automation, displacing a lot of workers. And so people are starting to talk again about things like guaranteed monthly income. And that might seem like a path for artists to actually do what they want to do rather than being stuck in a job that they don't like. Yeah. I'm glad to hear people are talking about it these days. I don't know what you think about all that. Is that kind of like a utopian future of everyone just having the time to do what they want, let the robots do all the work? Is that going to happen?
I hope so. I think people are amazing. And I think that not just artists, but I think everyone has so much to contribute that's more than just the basics. And I always just think it's such a shame that, we're not spending the time to really be the best humans, but make more stuff mostly. Yeah. So
stuff we don't need mostly.
Stuff we don't need, or systems we don't need. I mean, I always feel a little bit cynical when I go down this road, but if you go through the whole list of things that most jobs are, they're not really all that... you wouldn't look back and say we made the most of our humanity. Right. But...
yeah, so. And I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to that more than I've seen in the past. And it kind of reminds me, it feels like the world is kind of going through what maybe I did when I was kind of in my 20s, in the sense that you kind of realize that this world is... to be blunt, there's a lot of bullshit. A lot of things aren't what they appear to be. There's a lot of, forces at play that maybe aren't as obvious at the first glance. And also, a lot of people find that they're not able to justify their beliefs or their politics or their religion or anything for that matter. And what reminds me of something like maybe Friedrich Nietzsche 100 years ago was kind of thinking ahead to and said that, maybe in 100 years, everyone's going to be waking up to nihilism. And what's going to happen with the world? And it almost seems like this is what's going to happen to the world. It's going to get a little confusing, and people are going to start, jabbing at each other for world views. that they can't really justify.
Yeah. And I think that's what's happening now,
Yeah.
right? You sort of see it all over the world. There's these kind of extreme things happening in places that have been stable for so long. And I think there's like these huge movements that are happening, which are some are scary and some are wonderful and some are going to be scary until they're wonderful. But like, I mean, I think capitalism's dying. I think that there's all these movements that are coming up that we don't even know yet. I think that, and this is one of the interesting digital culture things, I think, is that there's this, it's not that the technology itself is the thing. It's that we've changed the way that we think because of it, because of the networks, because of the huge amounts of people, because of the power that it gives us as a general population. I think that our mindsets have changed a lot, and you can start to see that world over.
Yeah.
And I think those things, if we can somehow support those properly, will end up somewhere really interesting. But there may be some really old, powerful, rich people that fight it out a little bit before we get there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've had conversations over the years with some of my friends who tended to lean towards the conspiratorial view of the world, and I would often think that they were being quite silly, but these days it's starting to look like there might be some wackiness going on in the background. But I think one of the things that I'm noticing is that a lot of people just don't know what they're doing in positions of power. And, you know, we see this really obviously now in some cases, but that's the thing you notice as you grow up. You just assume, you know, when you're a kid that all the adults know what they're doing. And then when you're an adult, you realize, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing. And nobody really does. Everyone's just kind of making it up. And that's kind of it's a scary freedom in a way, because, you know, we all kind of realize that, I guess kind of like the existentialist viewpoint is that, I mean, we don't really have a justification for our, you know, maybe our political worldviews at some kind of fundamental level, but that gives us the responsibility to actually create it.
Yeah.
Now, because we don't have that given to us from a God or from, you know, some power high above, that we have to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just run from that responsibility, and I don't blame them, because, you know, sometimes I just feel like running away and, you know, living in a cabin. I just might do that next month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you think that, so one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is around with the rise of AI and all these, you know, sort of sentient robots, it's coming really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're sort of also responsible for us, but we're also responsible for them. And so there's this sort of interesting responsibility as we grow robots about how they learn from us and what we teach them in terms of exactly these kinds of questions and kind of what kind of world we'll all create together. Because it doesn't look like we're going to have a world without us living symbiotically. Like that seems like a inevitability at this point. So what does that look like if we're I mean, even using the word overlords, that's already a system that we're creating and teaching them, you know, that there is a hierarchical system. And so what does it look philosophically if we train our robots differently?
What do you think is going to happen? What's the likely scenario for you? Well, you know, this has been coming up a lot in these episodes, the future of AI and the super intelligence. And but what you just said just a little minute ago is when we do create the AI, we're trying to kind of feed it a morality, you know, a kind of a background knowledge. But that's not really true intelligence when you do that necessarily. Like when you have a child, it's just that you don't give them here's all the data, you know, and then just internalize it and go. That's not the way it works. It's kind of a process of learning over time and internalizing and making mistakes. Are we going to allow the AI to make mistakes? And if we don't, how is it ever going to grow and learn? You know, so it's going to be a different kind of intelligence, not really a human intelligence.
But it might be interesting because in terms of even just like climate change, if you are theoretically a robot that it relies on evidence as opposed to humans where we rely on so many other senses, maybe the practical thing that's best for everybody would just be to fix the environment instead of all these like weird human squabbles we have that somehow help hurt the little like planet that we're on. So there might be some interesting choices they make that are actually more relevant to their life and our life because we make choices that don't help us for some bizarre reason. Well,
we're very irrational, but also that, I already lost track. that super intelligent robot, The choices that they make, for example, and how to do it, how to fix climate. And one interesting somebody brought up is that, maybe an example of that is that the best way to fix the climate is to kill all humans.
Yeah, and that's possible.
Because that's a guaranteed shortcut to fix things.
Yeah.
But these are the kind of worries that some people are starting to talk about. Once this AI has super intelligence and once it's making up its own mind, and what's really kind of scary in a way is that, in a way, it'll be in charge of its own evolution in real time.
Yeah.
Right? Much like, we're not, but we're kind of getting there in a sense as well, because we can now start augmenting our bodies and, with CRISPR-9 technology, we can start augmenting our genes as well. So we are becoming the authors of an evolution that's guided by thought. And this thought is based on what we just said, a lot of irrationality. Mm-hmm. So it's just, to me, the future seems like so confusing and it's running off in 1,000 directions at once. And can you imagine everyone's like modifying their own genes? Yeah. What's going to happen there? It just seems so confusing.
Yeah. For sure. And sort of fascinating. I think one of the things that I think we do a lot also as humans is we tend to sort of catastrophize. So even if you look at a lot of future fiction, a lot of science fiction, it's always even things like Black Mirror, which I like, but it's always like everything is going to be terrible. And the world survived for a very long time with humans on it, and we've had some terrible moments and we get through it, but there's also a lot of beautiful and a lot of mundane and a lot of all of those things. So as long as we don't completely wipe ourselves out, they'll probably
which is a possible scenario.
Which is a possible scenario for sure.
Yeah.
But the chances are that it's going to be okay, right? But there's also this weird hybrid that I was thinking of not robot human, but robot and human, right? Like a symbiosis, which we already have between pacemakers and various artificial limbs and thought controlled computing implants. I think
between Siri and
I think that there's also these hybrids that will probably and most likely do happen, where it's not one or the other. It's not utopia, dystopia. It's not robots, humans. It's always somewhere in between all of those, and that's where it is complicated and super interesting.
Yeah, that's got to be the natural progression. It seems like, and even something like Google Glass that came out a few years ago and didn't seem to work very well, or so people thought. But it was just it's early technology. I'm sure it'll come back in some form. Even the Snapchat glasses right now are back. But I noticed that they're started to use it on factory floors, for example, where someone is doing some machine work. So it's kind of in combination with the AI, feeding it some instructions and some hints and clues. That seems like a good first step. And then eventually these devices start getting internalized and implanted. And I don't want to call it a slippery slope, but it's a slope. And we're going to go down there regardless of we want to or not. And it seems like the only way we can stop it is to have some kind of a totalitarian, like Chinese Politburo kind of government that controls everything. Yeah. We can't really avoid it. So I guess we got to talk more about it. Maybe that's the way to do it. Yeah. That's what we're doing.
And not be totally terrified of it, right? Yeah. I think that's always tends to be the state of going to the extreme of the robots will take over and kill all the humans. And again, that is one possibility, but chances are slim. Yeah. So it's more likely that the humans would do something terrible, I think.
True. Well, let me bum you out a little bit, though. I think you're right. If we're designing these AIs and superintelligences, they're probably not going to turn against us, and there'd be a lot of safeguards in it. But you think about bad actors and evil people that want to destroy the world.
That's true.
And it'll be so easy to create things that can just start chain reactions of, even if it's nanotechnology or combined with artificial intelligence, stem cells. I don't know. You can create your own pathogen and set it out in the world. Not to bum you out too much, but so, these are the kind of things that just on the horizon. And I don't know. I kind of oscillate between being worried about it and being kind of just ecstatic about all the interesting things that are going to happen.
For sure. Do you think that robots can be trained to be creative? Because I was just thinking a lot of the resistance that's happening right now is actually making humans incredibly creative. And, and a lot of the even movements like the Zapatistas or any of these kind of things, they all stem from kind of a human imagination and storytelling. So maybe that's the thing that ends up saving us as well as destroying us. So would robots need creativity in order
That's a
to
great
get
question.
out of
Yeah.
things?
And would they be okay? The way we tend to think about humans is that when humans tend to be very intelligent, they also tend to correlate to creativity very often. Also, when people tend to be intelligent, they also correlate with being moral in some sense, more than not. Is that a guaranteed thing for any kind of intelligence, or is it just human intelligence? I mean, part of the thinking of feeling comfort in the future of AI is that, well, it's going to be so intelligent that obviously it's going to make moral decisions, but we don't know what that is, and our moral decisions are based on a lot of our biases that go back to our bodies, which have been slowly building over millions of years to get where we are. So it's not a given that there's some kind of an objective morality. We got a lot of work to do, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
No, I honestly have to say I have no idea where things are going to go, which is why it's so interesting, because there's certain points where you can look at and it seems sort of obvious, but at the moment, the last few years, everything's on the table.
Yeah. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
But for some people, I can see how it would be terrifying. And I guess I got to just kind of remind myself that, and I think a lot of us were surprised with, the recent election in the States, for example. It's like, wow, where did all these people come from that voted for this craziness? And we kind of realized that we're definitely in our bubble on the coasts in a way, and we really weren't paying attention to what was going on for probably the majority of the people that are out there. Yeah.
Well, it's no different here as well. I mean, we are in the land of Rob Ford and Hazel McCallion to some degree, and all these different politicians that seem like they're so out of left field, but for a lot of people, they really connect with them somehow. Yeah. And I think that's the fascinating part. Like, what is it about these people, the Kelly Leaches, because general conservatism, I understand. I totally get that. But these people that seem to have no particular sort of logic or I don't know. I don't want to say intelligence. That's not fair, but they just seem so out of it. Like, I just don't understand the connection. And I'm really fascinated with that part of human nature of why would you do something that's actually hurtful to you in the group that you belong to?
Well, I guess my theory is that they're probably narcissistic and sociopathic in some sense, generally speaking, and just overly selfish maybe. Because I used to think of like someone like Harper. We had a prime minister for years, even before he was prime minister, seemed to be working towards helping the petroleum industry more or less. And it's almost like the same thing happened in the U.S. where you had like Cheney and the Rumsfelds and Condoleezza Rice. Essentially, you've had the petroleum industry lobbyists that came into power, and kind of happened with Harper in a way. And it seemed like all the decisions were kind of moving towards that. But I often wonder, what's his end game? Like, is somebody, if I'm there encouraging people to burn more fossil fuels and pollute the air and, heat up the earth and everything, it's going to affect me too. So why would I do that? So then, like you said, like what makes you, the only thing I can think of is that they might think, well, it's all going to go to shit anyway. I might as well be on top when it goes to shit. And I might as well be in my bunker. Is that, I kind of think, is that what they're thinking? Yeah. Otherwise, then you have to think that they are in some sense crazy in quotation marks because they're harmful to themselves.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think, he publicized himself as being Christian, but he didn't publicize the vein of Christianity that he was from, which was quite extreme. And I don't know how many people this goes for, but I was reading an article about how, at least for some of the very more extremist fundamentalist Christians, they actually feel like the world going to hell is actually helping to get them towards the goal of what they think is going to happen anyway, of the rapture and all of that. So they're almost like pushing this, and they don't care about what's happening on earth because that's not their end goal. And I think that's something that's really interesting too. Like, even I remember doing a medieval history course in university, and they talked about how one of the things that they had to convince the religious leaders to do was make people start to care about the place they lived more, because they were so obsessed with heaven that they forgot to care about here. And you see it in other religions as well, where people kind of forget to care about the earth because they have some other goal in mind, or some and a time span that's much longer than the few years they might be here. And that, like, learning about that really kind of shifted my brain as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that worldview is kind of converging with some of the techno-utopian worldview in a sense that, I mean, some people are starting to take seriously the fact that we might be living in a simulation, for example, which is exactly what really the Christian worldview more or less is that, you know, we're living in this reality in which we are anticipating a higher reality that we will then achieve, you know, the next badge when you die and move up to the next level. It's funny that what you would consider to be kind of the atheistic, mechanistic worldview has, oddly enough, brought them to kind of a religious viewpoint. So it makes you wonder, is there's something in us that is kind of leading us towards that way of thinking, it seems. Is that a weakness? Is that a strength?
Yes, probably to both. I mean, but it is sort of a fascinating thing about human creatures, right? Is that we always have this sense of the largeness. You know, like even with things like astronomy, which I'm not denying it's true at all. It clearly is. But it's fantastical. You know, like I think this week they said we're going to be able to have our first photographs of a black hole.
Whoa,
That's incredible. Like,
really? I didn't hear about this.
Yeah, this morning I heard about it, and it's amazing. But it's fantastical. We're putting a lot of trust in them explaining the universe to us, and you know, because I think that humans have this weird ability to see this very broad picture, whether it's religion or astronomy, like, and I don't know. I think it's fascinating. I think it's probably both helped us and fucked us up too. Like,
Definitely. And these kind of worldview shifts have happened a lot over the centuries, and like the Enlightenment, I think is a big shift. But it seemed like we had a lot of time to adjust. You know, there was generational time lapses. And it would spread throughout the world. It might start in some part of Europe, some form of political economy thinking, and then it will spread to somewhere else. It might take 100 years or more. Now we have things that take a few years, and in fact, any kind of information that comes out is pretty much spread that day.
Yeah.
So we don't really have time to adjust to it culturally. So we're always kind of on this treadmill that we're trying to catch up to, and that's only increasing in speed. So it seems like we're kind of approaching this limit in terms of how much we can adjust. Or maybe everybody says this every generation. It's like, oh, this is going too fast. How are we going to adjust to this? And then we somehow end up doing it. Yeah. So maybe maybe it's about the youth, and I do kind of keep thinking back to, like, maybe I can't adjust to it, but maybe the current 13-year-old right now is maybe not going to have a hard time dealing with this. You'd like to think that's the case.
Well, think about their brains. Like, if you've grown up entirely with the internet, for example, your brain's already expanded because you have this database in your head. Like, I know it exists, but it still feels separate from me. But I wonder if that's the same for people that have never lived without it, that have never not been able to, know how long a blue whale is or whatever they decide to look up. They know that it's all accessible. Whereas, I remember being small and still looking through encyclopedias to find information. Yeah, right. It's super fun.
I used to dream of having one in my own home. That was such a luxury.
Exactly. They were special, but they weren't updated, and you could only get limited information. And so I think their brains have already changed, probably.
Yeah, must have.
Which I think is fascinating. Like, it's so interesting to think of, because I think that I don't know, I'm curious with this thing between simplicity and complexity, because I think there's something about humans where we like to have things be simple, and I think that's where you get the kind of religion or the Fords or the Trumps, that make it very easy. Yeah. But then one of the beautiful things about human brains is that we are so complex and confusing and irrational and creative and smart and kind and all these things, and terrible things as well, and that the world is all of those things as well. And I don't know, I feel like to succeed in the next sort of century, it's going to be people who really understand complexity and can synthesize and explain and interpret complexity. I think those are going to be really powerful people.
You know how I'm training for that is with psychedelics.
How's that working out?
Pretty good. Yeah. It feels like when you're kind of in that psychedelic realm, it's you're kind of put in a place where what you just described is that you have this complexity that you have to kind of integrate, and what you do during that session quite often helps you when you're not in that state to actually integrate yourself and organize your internal energy flows. I don't know. I mean, it sounds, you start, since I've been taking psychedelics, it sounds like I talk more like a hippy dippy kind of, despite being, pretty much a materialistic atheist for most of my life, but speaking quite religiously more or less these days, especially when you start thinking about, this networking that is being allowed more and more between us, all of us. I mean, Facebook is a very primitive version of that, but especially once we get integrated. But then there's also this AI that we just mentioned, and we're going to be integrating with that kind of intelligence as well. So it seems like the future is kind of funneling towards this giant integration of intelligence. And that sounds very religious as well. It's like, we're moving towards essentially the mind of God is how someone might metaphorically, describe that. Does that sound religious to you?
It does. I mean, it's sort of interesting because I think all over the world, all cultures have had a few things. They've always had someone who is some sort of a medicine spiritual person, right? And quite often that involved being metaphysical. It involved giving advice. It involved...
Usually involves psychedelics too.
Exactly, drugs of some sort. It involved this sort of level of trust and this level of that person being a little bit outside everybody else. And that's been all cultures all over the world for all time. There's been people. And it almost feels like we need... See, this is the hard part. It almost feels like we need that for the new generation. But it also is scary because then it's those kind of like leaders with so much power, right? Yeah. But I don't know if they were necessarily like leaders in all of those cultures, or if they were just the place that you go and transform yourself, or you go when you need it. It's
They're
not
a functional segment of their society as opposed. Yeah, it's probably true. They weren't necessarily the leaders. Yeah. Yeah,
but I like that. It's a functional thing, and I think sometimes, at least in kind of Western cultures and in Canadian culture, we can get so Protestant about things and just think that, if a doctor signs me off on something, that's a fine drug. But if I choose to do something because of my spiritual and emotional health, then that's bad. Like, and being able to somehow reconcile that.
We're all very compartmentalized in what we accept as, what we can do with our brains. Yeah, it seems like, and that's always the funny thing for me, is that the religious worldview is very much against this altering of your consciousness. Yeah, it's like we're invading their turf,
Yeah, well, except for some, right? Like there's certain altered consciousnesses that are okay, that are okay, and others that aren't. Because you can do it through drugs. You can do it through like a lot of the Middle Eastern temples, like all the towel work and everything. That alters your consciousness because it's quite trippy. The chanting, the singing, the smells, the repetition, there's
spinning, whirling dervishes.
Exactly. Yeah. And even certain cultures have things like wine and other things in them too. So I think that maybe they just realized the power of it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but it seems like they also forgot it. If you look at a lot of the history of a lot of these religions, they were, as you described, more shamanic, more, psychedelic, more oracular. You just, someone breathes in some fumes and then starts spouting something about the gods or messages from beyond. And that seemed to be effective and work for people to learn from. But it seems like it became codified and became kind of dull over time. And now you get this a tiny sip of wine and a little wafer, but
which isn't even food, right? It's plastic.
Right. Yeah. So you're not really getting that experience anymore.
Sure. I was just trying to think of what the world would look like if either governments or businesses, which seem to be the main structures we have these days, if they 4 times a year they were like, okay, employees go and be shamanic for a month. It would be so interesting. They would become more powerful than I think they could even imagine if they let people do that.
No doubt.
A little creepy that those would be the two that would do it. But
yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it would be a hard sell to convince anyone to take that as kind of a practice, but clearly that would be the thing to do, and that's something that we've done for millennia. It's
Yeah.
always been the case. And the seasons are always connected to that, right? I mean,
Right.
what is Christmas and Easter besides, where these, where the sun and the stars are in the heavens and, because they reach some limit point and they come back and they're seasonal and they relate to, when the sun is going distant away, there's a chance you might not make it through the winter. So you have to kind of, strengthen yourself and prepare and mentally as well as physically to get through that. And then you have a festival in the spring when the sun is starting. Oh, we're back. We're going to make it.
Yeah.
And now it's, we don't even have a sense of night and day most of the time. So we're kind of disconnected
For sure.
from all the cycles that are out there.
Well, that's one of those, I mean, looping back to that whole idea of like the robots taking over the crappy jobs and giving us more time. I mean, that would be an interesting, because I think one of the things is that we're so used to working so much as a culture, and a lot of people don't know what to do with their free time.
That's very true.
But if that became more the norm, that you did these kind of, like week, 2 week long festivals every season, or like all these ways that you would spend time differently, but as a culture, as a group, not alone in your home, but as a community, that could be a really interesting phenomenon out of this sort of new movement away from sort of the 9-to-5 work.
But to do that, it seems like it needs to be somehow codified or structured, because if you leave a lot of people, if you just give everybody free time, I'm going to bet probably 85% of the people will just watch a lot of reality television.
True.
They'll just binge watch everything on Netflix, and I don't know if we're going to be any further along. But is that because we've just gotten into the habit of identifying ourselves with our work so much that it's just hard to conceive of it, so much free time?
It's partially that. I think one of the things as I get older, I realize is that a lot of people do need a lot more structure than maybe I do, which was a bit of a surprise to me. But I think a lot of humans do like structure, but within that structure, having freedom in that, being able to kind of give people, having us to hold space for people in some way, whether that's through religion, jobs, government, family, whatever that is. I think a lot of people really need to have space held for them. And then they're really happy to kind of be in that space. Yeah. But that framework really makes them feel kind of secure.
So your life is very unstructured is how you describe it. Is that what you're saying?
Right now it's very structured, but I'd be quite happy if it was.
I see. You preferred that. Yeah.
Well, I don't have any problem finding things to do. I have, my list is long.
It doesn't seem like you would. Very curious person. I think that's what it takes mostly is curiosity. This is normally on any given day, when I'm going to have a podcast recording, I tend to do nothing but that because, I don't know, I'm a little crazy and it's hard for me. But today, unusually, I've got a whole slew of social activities today. I was already out this morning for brunch with some friends and got this podcast now, and I've got another launch party going later, maybe even a date later after that. And all of these things kind of give me a lot of anxiety normally. And I realized, going back to psychedelics, I had a psychedelic trip, and I kind of realized is that most of the time I'm kind of anxious about a day like that. Not because, well, I'll tell you why I'm anxious. I'm anxious about it because I kind of have this fear that I'm not going to be energetic or present enough to do all of those things the way I want to. So as a result, I often avoid a lot of social contact because I feel like, I'm just not going to have the strength or energy to be on, and to be present. But I realized that that's my problem. It's not, the anxiety is actually created from the worry about that. It's not that I'm actually not going to have it's just the fact that I'm worrying about that causes me to get anxious. And then as a result, I get tired, and then my body wants to maybe take a nap at inopportune times. I always found myself when I have a lot of things to do or a lot of, I tend to get sleepy and dozy. So I'm just trying to deal with all these energies within me. Yeah. But are you quite energetic? Do you get everything done you like to?
No. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I'm sort of the same. When I get too stressed out, I just get tired. Yeah. But it's one of those things that the more I find, the less I do social things, then it seems harder. But as soon as you're in the rhythm of it again, it just becomes normal.
That's true.
Yeah. So I think that's probably a common occurrence. And I think that as we're getting more and more isolated in our worlds, then it becomes more of a worry for us. Because I think there's a lot of people that I hear that have that same thing, myself included, where it's easy to just become isolated because it seems like it's going to be a big thing.
Right.
And it rarely is.
No,
like,
it's not when you get there. It's usually not. Yeah.
And then even if you get there and you're like, I don't really want to be here.
You can leave.
You're an adult. That's the thing. You can just go home. It's not like you've traveled for miles and, brought out the dog sled and had to go. And like, it's somewhere in a big city. You can always go home.
Yeah. And, I happen to be in a position where I do have a lot of free time. And I have to say that maybe you should be careful what you wish for sometimes, because I waste a lot of time, and I'm getting better at it. But it's true. Like, that saying, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. It's, the more free time you have, it seems like when there's a little small task to do, it seems like the end of the world. Oh, I can't take that on. That's going to take 20 minutes. Are you crazy?
Yeah.
Whereas before you could jump into like a 4-hour, 5-hour session about something and not worry about it. But 20 minutes seems like a lot of work all of a sudden,
Yeah. Well, as one of the few people I know that have the luxury of that much time, do you find yourself falling into a rhythm? Like, do you feel like you need to do more because everybody else is, or do you feel like it's actually enough stuff?
I have enough stuff to do, but I could certainly do more if forced to. But I don't spend as much time alone as I used to. And that was one of the things, for many years, I don't know if you know about my past, but I did a lot of, I used to work very hard. That's what I'm going to say. I went into grad school. I went all the way to PhD, and then I was running businesses at the same time, and I had several startups going, and 16-hour days all the time, 6-7 days a week. And then it stopped. And then I think I went into some kind of a funk and, kind of a crash. And there was maybe a decade where I didn't really come out much. I didn't really, engage much with the world. And it's only the last couple of years and then this podcast is kind of a part of it. It's here I am, talking to the rest of the species.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing. I'm happy that I'm doing that.
Well, maybe it's just a balance. Maybe after all that work, then you needed some time down, and now it's time to reemerge.
That's true.
I think sometimes we have this sort of idea that we need this constant busyness, and sometimes just letting those cycles kind of lie. And it's hard when you're in the middle of it sometimes, but in retrospect, it always feels like you probably needed the time to recuperate, rethink, readjust. No, and when you don't do that, like when I don't do that, then that's when I start to get a little frustrated because I don't give myself time to. I actually think boredom is incredibly important, and I think boredom, especially for creative people, is incredibly important. And I don't think we give ourselves enough time to be totally bored. And I've been trying to do that for the last few years, and sometimes it's quite painful.
So do you find yourself bored occasionally?
I do sort of, sounds weird, I do sort of forced boredom in a way. Like
tell me more. That's interesting because I always try to avoid it, and I almost think of boredom as kind of like a sin. It's like like there's really no reason to be bored. You can always find something to do. But how do you engage with that? Yeah.
Well, I have real guilt about being lazy, but I'm trying to sort of separate those two in my brain. Like being lazy for me is just like not doing anything when there's something to do, and really not doing anything, like I don't know, watching Netflix or whatever. But sort of enforced boredom. So for example, I'm going to Bali next month, and one of the weeks I found this tiny beach hut that has nothing in it, and I'm sort of excited and kind of terrified of being in this tiny hut by myself across the other side of the world. But I often, when I've done that before, when I've given myself like a week to just be bored, but also know that boredom is working on a new story or a new art project or a new idea, it kind of gives me the freedom to not have to come up with something at the end of each day, but just explore different avenues and just know that space is held for, like, there's nothing I need to complete by the end of it except for thinking and wondering and wandering and,
So do you give yourself milestones and goals to reach on any given day, or is that how you do it? Because I haven't really figured that out yet.
Not for those ones, because I spend the rest of my life is always like checklists and trying to get
Oh, yeah.
more things done than I could possibly ever do, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's, and with working full time and making art, that's the only way I can do it, is sort of by continually making things. So these ones are really around just sort of creating ideas. And I haven't done it very often, but I found that every time I've done it, I've come up with a whole bunch of ideas that I'm still working through years later, because I let myself just think about them and really like wander off. And if I come up with an idea that's really terrible, that's okay. There's no pressure. So,
well, that's refreshing, because it seems like allowing yourself to fail is, I guess, what you're talking about when you're making mistakes and stuff. But I've had a hard time learning that. Maybe owing to some kind of conceitedness on my part. It's like I don't want the world to see me making a mistake, so you don't engage in things that you could fail at. And that's only now am I realizing that that's probably holding me back, from trying a bunch of different things and maybe making a mistake and getting better. It's so obvious. I feel silly saying it, but it doesn't really internalize to a lot of people, and me included, for a long time.
For sure. I think it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I actually had hit the point where I couldn't make anything because I was so judgmental of myself and my work. And I made myself a little list of things around a new project that I was going to start, which has now ended up being this project I've been doing for years. But it was like, no judgment. Every idea is fine. There was I couldn't think about where it would go in the world. Like, will this go in a festival? How will it look? How will other people think? Like, all those questions, I just have had to consciously, as soon as they come up in my brain, say no. Like, don't go there, because otherwise, like, a big one for me is like, does this matter? Like, I started to hit a point where I was like, why do I make things? Like, it's just putting more crap into a world where there's tons of crap.
Well, you got to ask yourself that once in a while. Yeah.
But I actually, once I took that question out, then it was like, I'm making it because I'm making it, and that's enough. And I've actually made a ton in the last few years because of that. But just my brain was like, this, why are you wasting your time? What are you doing? This is weird. Like,
well, not so much judgmentally, but you got to stop once in a while and kind of course correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems. And that's something a lot of people don't do, me included. It's like you get on a path and you just keep going, and before you realize it, years have gone by, and what the hell was I doing all that time?
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, that happens with work and relationships and businesses.
Absolutely.
All kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we had a guest on recently that was that does research into the cognitive abilities changing as you get older. And so it got me thinking a little bit about that. And I was talking to another friend of mine who's kind of in a similar age as me, and I think we're kind of both realizing that maybe it's time that we admit that we're actually kind of getting old, you know? And as a result, maybe consciously change the way you approach things. It's, I'm going to turn 50 next year. So, I'm probably at that point where I'm going to be that silly old guy that's just, running around with his mohawk haircut, and, which I do once in a while, and paint my fingernails, and what's this guy up to? And, sometimes there's kind of you go into a next cycle, and it's in a strange way, it's liberating to recognize that, hey, I'm going into this other stage. It doesn't need to be something degenerative and decrepit. It's just another stage, just like you did when you left, when you got into puberty and you became somebody else. In fact, you become somebody else, it seems, every few years or sooner. Have you changed a lot over the years, do you find?
I think tons, yeah. I don't think I think there's certain traits that I've carried through, but I think I'm probably very different than who I was 10 years ago and 10 years before that.
Do you like that person 10, 20 years ago? Does it bother you, or does it make you smile?
Both. I mean, I think there's some things that were really lovely about that person. I think I was very kind of like, I think I still can be a little naive, but I was very naive, and it was quite sweet. I was very much like kind of like spaced, not like a drugged out hippie, but a spaced out hippie. Just like everything was beautiful and lovely and nice, and I was very, very optimistic and had very little cynicism, and that was quite nice. But I was also incredibly shy and very scared of doing a lot of things. I think I could have probably been a lot braver.
So when did you leave the shyness behind? What changed? How did it? Was it slow or was it?
It was conscious, because I don't like anything. I don't like anyone telling me I can't do something. It makes me want to do it, and so it wasn't someone else telling me I couldn't, but I was realizing I was not being able to do a lot of the things I wanted to do because I was too shy to do them. So I remember consciously sort of telling myself that I was going to get over it, and that I remember my basic thing was like, just keep doing things until people to tell you to stop. And then that's when you know that it's the limit, but don't prejudge, don't pre-decide that someone's going to tell you not to do something because they probably don't care. Like,
yeah, that's the thing you realize, that people aren't thinking about you as much as you think.
No, nobody cares. And even if they do, they'll tell you. And if they don't tell you, that's on them. Like, that kind of stuff. It took a while, but it was very conscious because I was very, very shy. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have a good friend that I've been trying for years to kind of poke and prod to get him out of his shyness. It seems like there's a lot of brilliant people that are just kind of keeping it to themselves.
Yeah.
It's almost like, how do we get them all out, to share their brilliance with the rest of the world?
Yeah.
But you're kind of approaching storytelling as a way to make the world a better place. Is that kind of a safe thing to say? Because narrative building, storytelling, you were at the CFC, and which really focuses on that as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's really important. I think that it's one of our core things that humans do is tell each other stories and tell ourselves stories about ourselves. And I think it's an incredibly powerful tool. So I'm working with Joel McConvey on a project called Public Imagination, which is around just finding a variety of ways to use storytelling for social good. Because I think it's one of the most powerful things that we do as humans. I think a lot of art forms are like that, but I think storytelling seems to really go back to our earliest days of humans. Yeah.
In fact, you can even maybe make an argument that storytelling is at the root, even at the deep cognitive level, in the sense that when you say anything, when you communicate in any way to somebody else, you're kind of forming a narrative, you're forming a story, you're putting some ideas together. And that's the only way it's going to make sense to another person. You can't just blurt out words, right?
Well, generally I would say yes, except for maybe if you're Trump. But it's got a bit of word salad going on. But yeah, generally, every conversation that a human has with someone else is telling a story of some sort. So if we can find, and again, good or bad, like politics is a giant story. All these things are giant stories or small stories that, and I think some of those are interesting too, the very small stories that are very either personal or in our worlds or with the people we interact with every day. But they're all, I think that they're the way that we can remold and re-examine what this next world's we want to look like. Yeah.
And I guess it's always been kind of like that. The stories that we create as a culture tend to be kind of like simulations we're running for the future sometimes, especially sci-fi is kind of like that. It's, what will happen if this technology goes this way? Run simulation, which is basically writing this book or making this movie. Yeah. And it gives us a way to kind of, the viewers to run that simulation and then prepare for it. And that's kind of an important part of our cultural growth, it seems.
For sure. And I think that kind of, and it's sorry to use such a businessy word, but that kind of like change management of culture is, it's the only way we can kind of do things, because if we're not telling the story, someone is telling a story, it's happening. Right. And so if we can kind of help prepare people for the next story of what's coming, then it kind of gets them ready for when it comes. And I think some groups of people are really good at doing this. And I think some people do it unintentionally, like all of our media and filmmakers and all those things. I don't think there's a conspiracy when they're, all these advertisers, the way they treat women, unfortunately, has traditionally been fairly bad, but I don't think they got together as a group and said, let's make them feel crappy. But it just becomes the norm, and that's the story we tell ourselves. So I think by harnessing those, it's really important. Or, again, the one-on-one stories, like finding someone in power and telling them a compelling story, can really change a lot of people's lives. Yeah. So.
Well, it's even, propaganda is storytelling, all communication, all advertising. they're getting better at customizing the worldviews to each of us. Who's they? I don't know. But whoever is trying to manipulate your behavior.
Yeah.
Which is just about everybody that you're coming into contact with.
Sure, yeah.
Even your friends. I mean, they're saying something to you because they want you to do something or say something or react in a certain way. So everyone, we're always kind of being given a story in order to enact some kind of a change in us so that we behave in a certain way. And I guess we just leave that up to the powers that be. But these days, everyone's starting to realize that there is a story that's being told.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the peek behind the curtain kind of a thing is happening. Yeah.
And that's where I find it sort of interesting, the language that people use every day. I work in a different city that's got a very different culture than a lot of the creative people that I'm around a lot. And there's a lot of corporatization of personal life. And I think that those are the kind of stories where it gets scary, because the language starts to become your normal language for how you view yourself. Like even some of these like cheesy, like, what was his name? Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful Business People, which is fine because that's in the business realm. But then it started to be the whatever, those habits for your personal life. And then people start using words for themselves that are essentially corporate or advertising or business speak. And I think that that's where it gets interesting, because it's become so much part ingrained of your own story about yourself when you use that language. And I think those are the ways we can kind of fight back, are around using really clear language and really descriptive language and really knowing language, so that we're not using and commodifying ourselves. Because it's easy for, a marketing company to do that, but it's up to us to be able to kind of like even resist just through the language we use about ourselves and about our world. And I think that's one of the most interesting things that's been happening lately is A, we've realized what a bubble we're all in, but B, even just seeing all of the language that we all use, no matter where you are on any political spectrum, that creates walls and barriers and self-identifies people rather than connecting people.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we do a similar mistake all the time by applying this. Well, we're in this capitalist system, and everything, just the language is obviously affected by that, and all our practices are affected by that. And then you start to see, well, if X was run like a business, like the government was run like a business, it's like if something works in one realm, they take that and apply it to another realm. It doesn't always fit, but that's, that's brought us a long way. I mean, this way of thinking, which is very useful, but we forget that we're actually using a device to understand, and then we forget that it's a device, and we think that's the actual thing we're looking at. This framework, this metaphor of a business. You run your life like a business. It's kind of misguided, and we're all kind of susceptible to that, it seems. Yeah.
But I think that's one of the things that's happened over even the last year or two, is like making all of these structures and frameworks clear. Because I think some people saw them, but the fact that more people are seeing them the last couple of years, they're becoming really clear. I think it's exhausting for people because they're noticing it, but it's also making them aware of how we as humans have created all these structures that we're in and how they affect other people. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, we'd watch the news with my dad, and he would often say things like, well, talk about kind of the, I guess, the subtext in a story. Kind of opened my eyes to it at an early age. Well, this is happening because they probably do want to give that impression, and this is happening because of this, and et cetera. And it opened my eyes to a lot. It's kind of like that movie. Was it a John Carpenter movie? I think it was They Live or something. Well, there's a movie where people put on these glasses, and when they put on the glasses, if they're looking at an ad, for example, for something, they actually see the subtext behind it. And it was kind of like that. You're kind of given these goggles to see the world with. But I noticed as my father, who taught me this, gets older, he seems less aware of that. It's like you're more likely to fall for, the corporate media news stories and everything else. So I don't know. You think about the future as a degeneration of mind. Is that what happens? Is that cultural? Because I look back at myself, 20, 30 years ago. had a conversation like this with a friend recently. I thought if I could go back and give myself, this advice, people talk like this. And I thought that person 20, 30 years ago wouldn't have listened to me.
Mm-mm.
There's no way. They would have said, shut up, old man. You're just a softie. You're being weak. You're making all these excuses. You're rationalizing things because that's what it would seem like to me.
Yeah.
But now it's not.
Yeah.
So I don't know who's right. But I'm here right now, so I guess I'm right. I win.
Yeah. Probably both though, right? Like I think I love that kind of pure energy of young people when they're just like so passionate and they're so right. And it's kind of incredible to be around. And I think that they can push things and they can energize people to do things. But then, I think as we get older, we do figure out the complexity of the world and realize that it's not as simple as this or that. And, and sometimes it's just, exhaustion. We've sort of seen something happen and we're like, oh yeah, well, we tried that. And, but sort of having them come up and do it again is quite, it's nice to be around that energy.
Do you spend a lot of time with young people?
I spend a lot of time, I think, with people of all kinds of ages, which I think is great and very lucky. But the young people I know are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I say that too. I mean, I keep hearing in popular culture, all these people are shitting on millennials all the time.
Yeah.
It's just get off my lawn talk, is it?
Yeah, I think it's partially that. And I think there's definitely that. I think there's definitely, it always seems like the next generation has all these problems. Yeah. But I'm very lucky that the ones that I know, they're really interested in the world and they're really interested in change and they're mostly positive and they've got a lot going. Like they've got a lot. They've got like insanely heavy school debts. They've got like fairly little hope of owning things. They have gig economy, like no permanent jobs.
It's kind of heartbreaking that they have to go through that. Yeah.
And even with all of that, the ones I know are still, think that they can make a better world, think that they can, bind people together. They're very community oriented, very group oriented, very collaborative. I have a lot of hope in the young people that I know. So, yeah.
We could take a break now, or we can continue.
I'm good if you are.
You're good? Okay. Just didn't bring my glasses. I got to see how long we've gone. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So you want to start your own podcast, as I understand it.
I do, yes.
Yeah. What's that all about?
So it's, again, around sort of storytelling for social good. And so the idea is really building a toolbox, like kind of a toolkit of different kinds of storytelling techniques that hopefully can influence other people to use them and change the world. Because I think there's some really interesting things going on in the world right now that are really like people might not know about that could be useful for them getting out there. So it's partially that. Partially it's sort of this time in the world where it's like, well, what can I do? Well, these are the skills I have. So this is the thing I can contribute. So it's a bit of both those things together.
Mm-hmm. How soon are you going to start that? Because I'd like to listen to that. Yeah.
Well, we've sort of slowly started now. We're hoping this summer to really start getting like a one or two out to just sort of really practice and see how to craft them and how to make them. So I've got, like a team of people that are helping out. So, which is amazing. So we're going to, just kind of plug away, I think, over the summer and try and get a few episodes out just to see how it feels and how we like it.
And I've also noted that young people are listening to podcasts a lot. Yeah. Which is surprising, it seems, to a lot of people because of attention span, preconceptions that they're lacking it. But apparently not. Yeah.
I don't think so. I think that a lot of young people listen to podcasts. A lot of young people read. I interviewed for a job a bunch of young people in the fall. And one of the things that was so interesting to me is that there's about 5 of them, and each one of them with their friends had some sort of a project where they read together, where they would get together and either read to each other or like they really reading. And I don't know if it was just that it was a bit of an old fashioned thing for them. So it was a bit of a special thing to go back to like physical books, but everyone, and they didn't know each other. So they were just these sort of random assortment of people. I mean, they were all artists and writers, but they all had something where they got together with other people and read. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I've never been part of a book club or anything. Have you ever done that?
No, I've always meant to. But yeah, reading's kind of on my own. I don't know if I'd want to share.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
I like talking about books, but I don't know if I'd like to feel forced.
All right. Yeah, because it seems like homework, doesn't it, when you
I
have to read it
know.
and go. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's no preparation for this podcast. You just show up and talk. Could be to its detriment. I don't know. But yeah, I have this thing for improvisation. I seem to think that everything needs to be improvised, but it's probably just because I'm lazy and I don't like to plan. Are you a planner? Do you plan a lot?
No, I should.
Mm.
I'm sort of, I always feel like I should plan better.
Yeah. It seems to work for a lot of people. But I guess the fear is that when you plan too much that you might be robbing yourself of some creativity. I don't know if that's a valid consideration or fear of what might happen, or I don't know. It just, that seems to be the sticking point.
Yeah. Well, I always remember I had this one woman that I went to art school with, and she got way more work done than I will ever get done because she was so organized. Yeah. And I would panic and fret and worry. And then I would probably spend about the same amount, I wouldn't spend that much time and I could get things done. But a big part of my process was worrying and stressing out. And that's probably not very usul.
Yeah, we do a lot of that unnecessarily, it seems. Yeah. Do you partake in anything like yoga or any of these Eastern practice, speaking of all these hippie type things that I've been getting into these days?
Yeah, no, I have done yoga for years, although not in the last year, although I can get back to it now. I got in a car accident and I hurt my back, but it's fixed now, so now I can go back to it.
Good.
But yeah, I've always sort of, it's always been sort of something that's part of my world, maybe not as heavily as some other friends, but yeah.
I've meditated the last couple of mornings, which I think has helped already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a friend visiting again, and we get up in the morning and we meditate. I think it's helped me today. Yeah. Because, I've been up since 6:30 in the morning, which is unusual for me, and I still feel kind of energetic. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah. I find it fascinating because there's so many studies about how meditation is so, can really, help form your brain and help all those things. And it seems like such a simple activity, but it's kind of amazing how powerful it seems to be.
Mm-hmm. If for nothing else, it just seems to kind of smooth out everything else that's going on, kind of slows it down maybe, lets the cycles maybe not be so jagged within you. And breathing. I mean, so elemental, right?
Yeah.
We should focus on it. It's what we do. Yeah. If you're not doing that, you're not living.
Yeah, totally.
And I thought, if I get good at this meditating and focusing on breathing, I thought it could come in handy later on. I imagine, if you're maybe even get in an accident, or you're old, or you're in your deathbed or something, if you just breathe, you'll kind of come back from where you happen to be.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this woman, but a few years ago there was, I think she was a CBC journalist that had been kidnapped by, I think, the Taliban, and she was in a cave for a few months. And when she got out, she basically said that her whole upbringing had been through this sort of Buddhist meditation process. And because when she came out, immediately she was cognizant, she could speak really well, she could really and I remember just being completely impressed, because I'd be a mess if that had been me. And it was just
that would be helpful.
Yeah, and so these moments that are the worst moments, where you have that thing where you're like, okay, I can breathe, I can calm my mind down, I can't imagine, I would imagine if you were sick too, the same kind of thing. There'd be good processes to just go back to the basics. And
sometimes your body just needs a little bit of a nudge.
Yeah.
And breathing could do that.
Yeah.
Just start that ever slight movement towards kind of regularity, and then all your other systems in your body start to kind of catch up and start being regulated.
Yeah. For sure.
I'm going to do more of that, I think. Also, Tai Chi I've been thinking about lately. When I get into, I had this interest to speak psychedelic thing. Back to that. Recently, I have these issues with anxiety. I call it anxiety, but I don't even know what I call anxiety and what you call anxiety. Who knows if they're even the same thing? But in my case, it's kind of like a feeling in my chest, in midsection, that kind of feels kind of constricting and tight. I notice that comes and goes quite a bit. I'm getting better at it. But when I was going into this trip, closed my eyes, and the first thing that I imagined or envisioned was that I was in this water, and it was rising. And it was going up and up and up, and it was almost like I was about to drown, because, those movies where you feel like you're about to get up to the ceiling and the room is filling in. And I kind of got to the top, and I just felt like it was all washing over me. And then I looked up and I thought, oh, I'm in a swimming pool.
Yeah.
I could just get up and leave, which is kind of how I started to imagine my anxiety. It's like most of it is just there that I'm swimming in.
Yeah.
That really has no relevance anymore. And many of them are just like alarm bells that were left over from other things that happened to you. Maybe today, maybe 5 minutes ago, maybe 15 years ago, maybe when you were a child and it was traumatic. And these triggers have kind of turned on, and they're just kind of ringing in the background all the time.
Yeah.
But you realize you can just get up and leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very profound realization if you can internalize that.
Yeah. And then the more you do that, then it just becomes normal. And then your normal is knowing that you can go, so you don't even think about that anymore.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think about the shyness a lot, because when people I meet now, they're just like, they can't imagine that I was a shy person. And, but for me, it's still like, I know it's in my core somewhere, but it just became so normal now that it doesn't faze me the way that it would have when I was younger. I would have really been anxious about meeting new people or doing new things. And now that's just not, it's just habitual to not be nervous, to flip it around the other way, That's
true. And another thing I've been noticing about that is that when you recognize that energy that I call anxiety within me, when I recognize that, I'm trying to kind of develop a practice where I can redirect that energy.
Yeah.
And I'm getting good at that, I think. Well, not good yet, but better at it.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that if it was a practice that you kept at for years, that, it's kind of like a superpower if you can, because there's so much anxiety or these kind of negative energies, what you think of as negative energies, if you can kind of find a way to redirect them and turn them into positive, it's almost like then you would want that negative energy to come in, because it's like, oh, there's free energy.
Yeah.
Bring it in. I'll just convert it into something useful.
Yeah.
It seems too good to be true almost.
Yeah. I feel like I've known like a handful of people in my life, not very many, but that were so zen and so calm that they radiate it in this way that just makes you feel, it just calms everyone in the room. And I think that would be a beautiful state to be at, where you were just this kind of like beacon of calmness. Would be beautiful.
Yeah, I guess I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like I feel the responsibility to project that.
Yeah.
It's when I am feeling that inside me, I don't want to let it out naturally, because you don't want to freak out the other person. You don't want. So, and also because I guess I always kind of felt in a position of responsibility when you're running businesses and you have people working for you. You don't want to look like you're freaking out and nervous. So you get kind of good at just having a poker face all the time. But that kind of deadens you inside as well, because eventually you're kind of pushing down all of these things rather than dealing with them. Yeah. And that's kind of the story of my youth. It's just push those away as opposed to recognizing them.
And I guess that's the balance, right, of knowing, because sometimes it is better to not let everyone know you're freaking out, but then sometimes being vulnerable really helps you connect with other people. That's helps you to, like sometimes you hear somebody that you think their life is perfect, and then you start to realize that it's not, and it makes you feel better about your world. Or if they have a similar thing, like a similar anxiety or a similar issue than you do, then it gives you some way to really connect with them. But then people that are constantly like that can be a little too much. So
that's true.
I think that's one of those sort of like balances of figuring out when it's time to kind of
it's always about balance,
down.
Isn't it?
It is, I think there's no way around that.
Yeah, I guess I've gotten better at revealing those inner turmoil to the people around me, and it's been positive mostly. Like you said, more people are more likely to connect with you rather than run away from you.
Yeah.
But unless it gets too much, I guess that could be a problem.
Yeah, people let you know generally.
That's true. That's true. So, what about this neighborhood here? You live nearby.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great place to live.
It is. I was thinking, so I live a little bit further away in the Junction Triangle, which is a very tiny little neighborhood. And the other day I was thinking it looks a little bit like hipster Richard Scarry, book. Because there's sort of everything there. I even saw a person one day like out like plein air painting, like outdoor painting, and then there's people with their bikes and little businesses and coffee shops, and it's like this perfect little neighborhood where people do things. And
kind of like a Brooklyn or something is the image of Brooklyn anyway. we're kind of getting that. And also Hamilton is down the road.
Hamilton's amazing.
Is where I grew up, actually. I don't know if you know that.
Interesting.
But
No, I didn't.
yeah. And people are finally discovering it
Mm-hmm.
as a alternative place for artists to live,
Yeah.
which is always the case, right? So the artists always kind of are pioneers in any geography, it seems,
Yeah, for sure.
within the urban landscape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know some people moving out that way, or?
So many people, and every
Yeah.
time I go now, I just run into other people that I didn't even know had moved there. It's incredible, and some of their studios, I'm so jealous. They're so
some
beautiful.
huge old buildings that
yeah.
are been vacant for years and years and years.
Yeah. And now there's sort of enough other people out there too that there's a community. It's good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My sister and brother-in-law were involved in these art crawls that they have in James North, and that seems like it's working.
Yeah.
But when you from Toronto, it does still seem a little provincial when you go to those kind of things. It seems a little early days, but that's how it begins, right?
Yeah. And I guess it depends what you're looking for too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the people I know that have moved there, they're really interested in having more time and for their studio work and having, it being a little bit cheaper, and they don't need the constant energy of the city. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Any other cities you'd like to live in?
Oh gosh, probably anywhere.
Really?
Well, not anywhere. That's not fair. But I don't know. I mean, it's funny. I ended up going to Australia a few years ago. Had never had any interest in Australia, but Melbourne, if it was closer, I love Melbourne.
People seem to like Melbourne a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of like a weird mix between Austin, Texas, and Europe. So it's just really interesting. I still wouldn't mind like trying New York for a little while. I think that would be good.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go back and forth between then wanting to like live on an island somewhere in the middle of like one of the places I'm staying in Bali is actually this artist retreat. And it's sort of like a hotel artist retreat. It's beautiful. And I was like, oh, I could do that. Maybe I'll run one of those.
Oh, it's interesting you bring that up, because this very building we're in right now, that's one of the things I'm thinking of when I think about adding an addition, is to kind of turn it into an artist retreat / I don't know what, lodge of some kind, Sufi dervish lodge.
Well, that would be amazing. Yeah. So
seems
this
like a lot of work, though.
It could possibly be.
I'm too lazy for that. But I'm thinking about it.
Somebody else could run it.
That's true. Yeah. I was just saying all my neighbors around here are putting additions to their buildings, and it might be a good time to actually do it when all the noise and dust is around.
Yeah.
At the very least, I think I'm going to dig out the basement here and kind of turn it into a kind of an event space, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is what we do here anyway. I mean, we have a lot of parties and events and music shows, and we're going to have stand-up comedy here soon. And it seems like the basement is underutilized. You get another, I don't know, maybe 2,500 square feet of space that's not being used. Yeah,
we do that at so at my house we have music events and art events as well, and it's a nice way to use space if you have it, and it's and people always appreciate like coming to your house for music, and it's a really kind of intimate and fun and lovely kind of way to help support musicians, and then also have just like a nice way for my friends and I to hang out, and I love it.
We're having the next party here is going to be the May 2-4 weekend. You're welcome to come. But I've kind of got mixed up with this group of house music heads. So we're going to have a lineup of DJs. Most of them are house, some techno. Not that I make music like that myself, but for some reason I've kind of tagged along with a bunch of these guys. So I kind of run in these circles. But it's a great community of people. They're so positive and, welcoming, and it's kind of like a different form of hippie love,
Totally. Yeah.
It's very interesting to see that. But the one thing, the party we're having is on May 21st, but apparently it's also the same night that the Revolution, Prince and the Revolution has a concert. So apparently half the people that would come to this will also go to that. 'Cause they love Prince in that community. Not surprisingly, funny. I guess.
Yeah, ours seems to be a lot of, because I have two people that curate the music, and they're amazing, but it's a lot of kind of more indie rock, but we're we're all kind of working towards sort of expanding that a little bit
indie
more.
Rock, yeah.
So,
do you play something yourself?
No, that is not my musical skills. I have no musical skills. God, no. I wish, no, nothing.
Singing seems so hard. I mean, hard to do emotionally,
with people that are amazing at it. Like I just often think of like, your body as your instrument. Like it would be incredible.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, being able to watch people really sing that close has just been an amazing experience. 'Cause I think we've probably had, maybe 100 people in the house. It's over the last 3 years.
So it's quite a large space.
Oh no, my house is tiny, tiny, tiny. So we do sort of one-offs, and then the last few years we've started doing bigger ones. So we do one for Canadian Music Week, which is on the 22nd, which you can come to the next day.
Yeah.
You can come party here and then relax at my house listening to indie rock. And that one, I think we have 10 bands, and then and that one Shannon Martin really runs, and then so I do this with Shannon Martin and Rich Taylor and myself, and then we have another one called Heartbeat. So I had this dream for a few years of having the world's tiniest music festival. And so last year is the first year that I did it, and it was like a tiny little festival map, and I made a tiny little sign for the festival, everything you'd have at a big festival, but in my tiny little house.
That's cool.
We had art installations, and that one tends to have some of the musicians are a little more like doing more experimental work. So we're kind of trying to have that one. It's more of like more on the, if artists want to try something new, that's a good chance for them to be able to come and
experimental. Like it's still within the indie rock type realm, or do you mean?
Sure. So for example, last year we had somebody who's usually in a rock band, but he had this kind of piece that he'd done where he was playing guitar, but then he made this audio recording of a GPS that became existential and had an existential crisis. Wow. And it was just like really lovely and beautiful. And Rich, he kind of knows him and Shannon both know what I like. When they see things they know that I would like, which is usually on the weirder side, they're like that. Cool. So he played that, but he's usually in a rock band. So that was kind of fun. And then for some of them too, like there was another band that played, they usually played at kind of decent sized sort of stadiums and stuff. And I put them in my garage like teenage rockers, right? And they just thought that was great. Awesome. So it's sort of taking them out of their norm and putting them in this kind of space. And they've all been incredibly supportive. So it's been cool. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I do a lot of experimentation with, I basically buy some gear, try it out for a while. And right now I'm about to return a bunch of gear and get different gear, see what sticks and what doesn't. Yeah. I've got this drum kit there, but I'm gonna get an electronic drum kit, I think.
Oh, that's
finally.
Fun.
Yeah, just, basically you get 1 million drum kits instead of one. you give up something, obviously.
Yeah.
For
it's a different sound, but that's okay. Yeah.
And also I can put on headphones. And, there's a restaurant opening up behind my wall here. I don't want to necessarily bother them with my drums all the time.
Yeah. So what's your favorite thing to play?
This one here.
The Ableton?
Ableton Push.
That looks fun.
Yeah, you basically program all of these 64 buttons to be any kind of loop that you want. You can change the effects with these buttons.
Nice.
Basically, it's so amazing that you can essentially take, I can just go tap, a few times and put it in there and in real time just start processing it. It could turn into a symphonic kind of multi-piece music just from the bang, bang, bang. It's amazing what you can do. It kind of blows my mind.
It's pretty incredible. In my 20s, I was with somebody who was an electronic musician. And so our whole house was full of vintage synths and stuff and all this stuff. Yeah. And then one of his best friends lived 2 floors below us who also had that. So we basically I didn't really have as much of an apartment as a studio, but this equipment was amazing. So it's one of my regrets that I kind of didn't play with it more because I sort of always thought, that's sort of his thing. But now I'm like, man, I had the best equipment in my house and it was really...
Wow, those old school synths. Yeah. I haven't really messed with them. That looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think my favorite was the MS-20.
MS-20.
Yeah. Because it's kind of got its own flavor. Like it doesn't, because electronic instruments are sort of known for being the same all the time, right? Like having that's one of their things is that they're very consistent. But the MS kind of has a mind of its own.
Yeah.
So it's really fun.
There's also, the 808. There was a documentary I watched about it, and something interesting about it that I didn't know, which is kind of like what you just said. Apparently, each of those 808s are slightly different because the chip that the guy was using in Japan, he actually bought leftover defective chips.
Oh, interesting.
So they were much cheaper. The ones that they were going to throw away at some other company, he used them. So they're all slightly different.
Yeah.
And that's why there's kind of a magical quality to it. Now, people are probably reading more into it as we tend to do.
Yeah.
But that's a great story. I wonder how true that is.
Yeah.
And, that device over there actually has the 808 in it, the 909, 606, and the 707. It's got 4 different drum machines plus turntables. It's crazy what you can just fit into one device now.
I know, it's incredible because, I think, Mike started selling everything off because the other equipment started being as good as that stuff, Yeah. But actually the Roland guy passed away this
That's
week.
right.
Yeah. I just keep having this image of him sort of disintegrating into little musical bits into the universe and creating a new harmony of the universe.
Ping pong relay, echo away.
Yeah. So what are the new instruments you're getting?
Well, with this, it's almost like an infinite number of, but what I'm going to get more into is percussion, which is where I started.
Yeah.
The only lesson I've ever taken in music is drum lessons.
Yeah.
So that analog drum kit over there really doesn't fit well into this electronic environment. So if I get an electronic kit, I can then essentially do whatever I want with it and mess with the effects. It's more of the effects that I really like to... it's like you can get some simple sound, and by messing with the effects, you get, I don't know what it is. It's, to me, visually, it seems like multidimensional. Again, we're getting into the weird hippy-dippy psychedelic shit, but there's a sound in the music, and then when you're putting it through these effects, you're actually getting kind of interference patterns between itself. Like there's like a pattern that triggers, and then it does it again, and then it interferes with itself. And that interference is actually where the musicality starts to come out for me. So I start paying attention to how it's interfering with itself.
Yeah.
And then you get different layers on top of that. And it's mind-boggling because it seems like you're getting sound and narrative essentially out of nothing.
Yeah.
And it's the sum is greater than the parts. It's kind of fascinating and trippy.
Yeah, and all those liminal spaces is always where interesting things are happening, right? So, that's cool.
Yeah.
Have you ever played with a hang drum?
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Briefly.
Yeah.
I'd like to get one of those. Thanks for reminding me.
You're welcome.
Get one of those. Yeah.
They're beautiful. They're kind of something, because they sound so electronic.
Yeah.
And they're so, and even I sound good on them because you can't sound bad on them. They're just so beautiful.
Well, that little device there actually has hang drum program on it.
Okay.
But I mean, it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite. And see that xylophone or marimba over there on the floor? That's an example of something that you can't sound bad on.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's this African instrument. I have no idea what it is. It's a one-off. And I just play with it all the time. And it seems like without any musical training, it just sounds like music. It's fascinating how that works.
Yeah, well, I got one of those kalimbas. Do you know the kalimbas? So it's
right,
with the wooden
thumb.
box and the little thumb harp or whatever they call them. And I had this whole dream in my head that I was going to learn how to play this. And I found all these versions of Mad Mad World on, played on this. And they were all so beautiful and haunting and great. And I think it's funny because with music, I just don't have the patience. If I can't do it right away. With other forms of art, I can spend hours and figure it out. But I just get
I totally get
patience.
that. Yeah, and that generally keeps me from a lot of things. And music too. It's I think I've always had this musical interest in me, but it's only the last 3 years that I've started doing it, and it's because the technology has finally caught up.
Yeah.
Where to my laziness. So, so I don't have to spend, days learning something. I could just jump right in and play with it, and it's ready.
Yeah.
Now I can do it. The other day I found this app for the iPhone. Just a simple thing with a bunch of loops, and you press the buttons. And well, I could just have fun for hours with this. Maybe I don't need all this, all this gear. Maybe I've just spent all this money for nothing. But it's getting easier to do, which which is one of the great things about the technological advancements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they kind of raise the bar for all of us, whether it's video making or music making. It takes away a lot of the kind of that side of it, so you can just work on the creativity. I think it's really interesting. I know some people don't like that about it, but I think it's really interesting because it gives people an opportunity. And of course, there's always going to be bad stuff, but there's amazing things too.
But I got to tell you, in some ways, it makes me maybe value it less because it's so easy.
Yeah.
I mean, relatively speaking, I start something, I make out of nothing, a song starts to come out very quickly, and I think, well, this can't be great because I just did it in a few minutes. Like, it must be shit.
Yeah.
Like if it's that easy, then everyone can do it, and which is true. Everyone can do it now, and that's great. So that's gonna, I guess, proliferate a lot of creative people. I mean, music and video, like you say, and I don't know, you can't really make your own video games very easily, but
yes, you can.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, so there's platforms for that too. I mean, again, every layer of kind of craft, there's always more depths that you can go to.
Yeah.
But to just get something decent out there, I think it's pretty easy for everyone. But you always know when something's magical.
Right.
Like there's always that thing that you're like, okay, everyone's pretty good, and then you hear something that's just profound, and you're like, okay. I bow down to that, sure.
I have resisted video games entirely.
Yeah.
It seems that I have not bought one of those game station type thingies or consoles at all. And I think I was maybe afraid I might get sucked in, to be honest. It was kind of like the reason I didn't do psychedelic drugs until my late 30s.
Yeah.
And also, I'm waiting for the VR to be, like, I want to be a totally immersive experience. Like the music, I waited for the technology to catch up. I don't want to spend time. I just want to just jump right in and be in another world.
Yeah.
I think we're getting there, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, for sure. It's funny because I'm the same way, both about the drugs and about the video games, as I was just scared of just losing huge chunks of time in them.
Yeah.
But I'm so fascinated with them. I think they're just such an interesting medium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you spend time playing games?
No.
Yeah.
No, not really.
Mm-hmm.
I know more about them than actually playing them, which I know is quite a different experience. But yeah.
But I guess, story narrative has a lot to do with it too, because one of the games that sounded intriguing to me was not very complicated.
Yeah.
I think it's called Journey. This was years ago.
Yeah,
do you know about this? Yeah.
I do know Journey, yeah.
I thought that almost got me to buy in and try it. Then maybe I will. Is that generally a good one to go? Because it seems like how I heard it described was that you just go into this game without any instruction. You have kind of a character that you're moving around. There's you kind of figure it out as you go along, and you come across other characters. And I've heard people describe it as something that makes them weep by the end of it. Wow. So it seems like video games are kind of attained a level of art
For sure.
that maybe they're ready.
There's definitely some amazing ones. I mean, it's interesting because some of the ones that have worked for me are things like, have you heard of Flower?
I haven't.
So Flower is this very meditative, beautiful, simple video game. And at the time that someone showed it to me, which was several years ago, I had only ever seen this sort of very fast-paced, action-oriented kind of video games. And Flower is this very slow, where you're a pedal in the wind. And there's a very simple storyline to it. And so you go through and you're just collecting other petals, and the music is completely mellow. And the guy who wrote it also made a video game called Flow, which was actually his PhD thesis. Yeah. And it was the same kind of thing, just this very kind of meditative video gaming that was that had been very new to me at the time. So for me, that was really interesting because it just felt it felt more like meditation than gameplay. So I think those ones are interesting. And then I also get sucked in with things like, so I actually program both video games and art onto these giant billboards in Mississauga.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really fun. So for gaming on the screens this year, we're doing kind of an art gaming event. And some of the video games are really fun. Like I found one called Starwall, which is about narwhals.
Oh,
But it's like old pixelated, like 8-bit, And so there's fun ones like that are really neat to see on the screens, and that also are just sort of fun and funny. So they kind of fit in with that. But there's just some beautiful art-based games as well that people are making.
Yeah, it's good to see it. And as they become easier to make, you're going to have experiences that are made by artists as opposed to corporations making giant things to basically suck you into the game and keep you there. And I kind of worry about that in VR as well. Like when we're in kind of a VR environment, especially when you have suits, maybe your Fitbit is taking your heartbeat and your skin conductivity and maybe your pupil dilations are being recorded. So I'm thinking you're in this virtual realm, you're kind of looking around and not even what you're focusing on, but something maybe in the background that you kind of looked at for a microsecond and your eyes dilated and your heart kind of perked up. So the AI is going to know, that person reacted this way to that image.
Yeah.
So I'm going to include that into the storytelling, and then the next character that comes up could have some element to it.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at is that this AI that's kind of running this experience for you is going to be able to essentially pick the best things to seduce you
Yeah.
into playing the game,
Yeah.
to staying there,
Yeah.
and maybe never leaving.
Well, I mean, that's pretty much what things like Facebook do too, right?
That's
It's
right.
that
They're designed for that.
Yeah, and you start to see things that are based on things that you've put into other programs
right.
or other, and you're like, oh, why is, this is also interesting to me.
Yeah.
And then you get in this weird bubble of not being able to see outside of it.
Yeah. And then when you put that into the hands of people that are trying to, as we said earlier, manipulate your behaviors, you've just given them an amazing tool to do so.
For
so,
sure.
Yeah. I don't know how we stay ahead of that. Yeah.
Well, I don't think we have. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think they're already in there, and I think they probably have been for years.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I tend to think that, again, going back to the power of storytelling, it's also good for control, and it's good for people that do evil as well as people that do good. And control can be good or bad, right? But I mean, any kind of religious teaching is essentially a strong storytelling tool, and some of those have been used to keep people in place or do things. So I think that it's already happened.
Control. Yeah, that's a major one. And also, self-control and outside control.
Yeah.
That seems to be the story of our lives in a way.
Yeah. I think it's the benign control that's the scarier one, because I think, things like governments, it's a very, if they want to control, it's very clear. But I think like marketing and corporate control, I don't think it's people at the top going, ha ha ha, how can we do this? I think they're really just trying to sell products more. But the end result is that we have this benign control over, always doing things this way instead of that way. And
it's guaranteed systemically to lead us in certain paths. Which, brings us back to capitalism and its last days.
Capitalism, I know.
So what are we going to replace it with? It's, how they said, it's the worst system except for all the others kind of a thing.
I know. I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows what the system looks like yet. I mean, I think it's definitely one that's more, or I would hope it would be one that is more as a group, and more, I mean, you see things like, do you know buns?
Yeah, I haven't tried it, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting kind of large-scale social trading system. So it's both replacing selling things because everything's a trade for something else, but it's also got this really lovely social element to it as well. And there's something in that. There's something in systems like that I think, and even, I mean, I think, Uber and Airbnb, they're definitely corporations, but there's something in that sharing the things you have that I think that if we can capture that, then I think there's something really special that could happen in that kind of a system.
And that's really, I mean, the thing is, capitalism was kind of that killer app in a way. It's like an earlier version of it because it's open system, it's open source, it's open market. The rules are made by the players as they play.
Yeah.
But something happens with any kind of a system that's allowed to, evolve and progress into its natural direction, which is for the players to optimize everything to its extreme. And when you optimize everything to its extreme, you have extreme wealth inequality and, corporations buying political results and that sort of thing. So I hope we at least keep that open source aspect of capitalism. And in fact, I was involved with a group of people about a decade ago, and it's still going on, where we would meet every year and just at a conference somewhere in North America, like 50 of us, and we'd talk about, essentially we talk about capitalism most of the time, but how to do it differently, maybe, how to humanize it, how to slow it down, how to, I don't know, not kill us, that sort of thing. I don't know if we ever got anywhere with that, but it was good to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's that humanism part that's missing, because I think capitalism at its worst can run without humans, because the main goal is to have more capital. The main goal isn't to make life better for humans.
Right.
And so I think whatever the next system is, that kind of goal of people and planet need to be somewhere in its core, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, mathematically, it's doomed to end up where it does, because it's just, you can't have infinite growth. It's like the only thing that grows without end is kind of like a cancer. I mean, it's it seems like we're eventually going to find that. It's, I imagine these, when you look at those egg timers and they have those little sand dunes that form when you turn it over, and then eventually it gets to this peak where it just kind of has difficulty achieving this height, and then it kind of collapses down and it keeps coming back up. I kind of see our social, political, economic systems kind of like that. It's like we always kind of reach this peak point where we have a hard time sustaining, and then it crashes back down. Yeah, it seems almost inevitable to the way we're going about it to do that.
Yeah. And I think other systems are just rising, and I think it's going to shock people. And I think some of them are things like the Trumps and the Fords, but I think that there's other systems that are just happening, and then they're suddenly going to topple. Yeah, you know, the capitalism and other systems that are in place, and I think it's going to surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, and technology is obviously going to be a large part of that.
Absolutely.
Do you know anything about this blockchain revolution that they're talking about?
I'm just learning about it. Yeah, it seems really interesting, but I'm just learning about it. But it's
well, it seems like it's something that could lead to greater transparency and better record keeping. You can even imagine, not just money systems, but even social networks, any kind of a group connection where you're doing things together. Yeah. With the blockchain, it seems like you can have basically a permanent record of all the changes that can't be altered. So there's always a historical record, and no one can go back and say, well, and lie, essentially. Yeah. Which is really the killer app in a way, that you want to be able to have a cultural system in which truth-telling is enforced, but not enforced. Yeah. Like no one's sending you to jail for it, but it's just impossible to mislead or more difficult to. Yeah.
Which is really interesting for like artists and musicians, right? Is this idea of having sort of truth in their work, or not truth in their work, but like that kind of record of where it came from, and sort of copyright and that kind of thing. Because I think that that's obviously a big issue now with things being traded so quickly and so easily. But what how interesting to be able to actually pull it back to the make the artwork and the person connected more through something like blockchain.
Yeah. I guess the artists, I mean, you look around me here in this room, there's a lot of paintings which seem kind of old, old school. But that was a way that an artist could make something and have an object and then sell that object. Yeah. It seems harder to make that kind of a chain of actions that will lead to some kind of payment, especially in the digital realm when you do it. And obviously in the age of mechanical reproduction, everything is copied very easily as well.
Well, that's why it's interesting. Like, do you know much about Chance the Rapper?
A little bit. I know what I've heard. I liked a lot.
Yeah, because he doesn't sell any of his music.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right? So it's all around selling the experience and selling the things that are not the music. And he seems to be doing quite well. That's great. So that's also interesting, too, because you see this real shift towards people wanting experiences and wanting experiences more than things. Yeah. And so if you just, I always find it interesting, like a lot of us have been sort of fighting it out, going like, we need people to pay for music and art. And then he just kind of went, well, let's do it this way. Yeah. And he's still getting money as a creator, but he's just changing the rules. And I'm sure there's other people working like that too, but it's this interesting idea of going, well, what's the end goal? Okay, the end goal is to be being supported as an artist in the system that we have. I think
that's great. Yeah.
Right? So instead of going, like just fighting the same system over and the same fight over and over and over again, just bypassing that, it's kind of an interesting way to look at it.
It's true. I have, as I said, a bunch of friends that are in kind of this house music techno thing, and they produce tracks, and they spend a lot of time, crafting it and getting it to sound just right. And they seem to have a lot of difficulty. Like, where do I place it? Where do I put it? Did I put it on iTunes? And I always tell them, give it away. Yeah. At least get people to like your music first, and maybe then sell it. Because, if you try to sell something at the beginning, 10 people buy it, and what good does that to you? Whereas if you give it away, maybe 1,000 people download it, and that's going to spread your. Isn't that what you want? You want your art to be consumed in some sense.
You do, but you also need to make a living, right?
You do.
So that's the struggle, is like there's still systems that are in place and you still need to pay into them to keep going. So it's I think it's tough.
I had this startup idea a long time ago. We called it Drink Music before iTunes and all that stuff. The idea was essentially to have kind of like iTunes, but everyone that participated in there by putting their music on there would actually have based on their sales, would start to accumulate ownership in that entity. Drink Music. So you create this ecosystem where everybody is distributing, but also benefiting from everybody else that's distributing on that. So it's kind of like an equalization going on. And if any one of them turns out to be huge, then everybody kind of benefits from that. Yeah. I like that kind of approach. Didn't really get off the ground. But maybe people are ready for it now. Yeah, this was like 20 years ago, maybe.
Yeah. Because I feel like the music industry kind of shot themselves in the foot by not, like right away, they should have just been going with the online stuff, and they fought it for a long time. But I mean, I think that there's a time to be like, there's disruption to be had, because even things like even the way that you buy music, it's not fun. Like I loved going into record stores, and I loved, it was fun. It was social. There was like so much culture around those record stores.
Visual art element. The album covers were amazing.
Yeah. And then you go into iTunes, and it is the worst interface. It's not exciting. It's not fun. There's not a lot of discovery. Right. But it's what we use now. You know, I was even trying to like think of how do you even gift people music the other, like how do you give someone music now? Like it's not the same. And so a lot of the joy is gone. So if you can recreate that joy, like you see this sort of rise of, record stores, and you see this kind of like, you know, there's bookstores that are thriving, like people want to go.
I don't know if you noticed, there's 2 bookstores right beside me here. It's very weird to have 2 of them in a row. Yeah, it's bizarre.
So I think the bookstores haven't caught up to the records, but the record stores are definitely there. Like all the HMVs got bought out by Sunrise. And so I think there's a sense of wanting to go back to that kind of community culture connection.
Vinyl's
experience.
Back.
Yeah. And even I have a friend whose daughter is early 20s, and she's a punk, and they trade things on tape, and they make zines.
No, that's going too far.
Right? I know. But the thing that's interesting, well, the thing that's interesting that we were talking about tape is that with tape, you can both record and play back.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Where you can't do that with CDs, with 8 tracks, with, you know, like other mediums, you can actually have this back and forth with it. I mean, the sound isn't great and all those sorts of things, but even just this idea of they're recreating an experience. And, you know, so I think that if there was a way to kind of reframe that, there could be a huge disruption in the way that music is sold or experienced. Because right now it's not as much fun as it was.
That's true. Yeah, but like you said, what they say about the millennials is that they're after experiences rather than things. And so in a way, I guess the way that the artists are going to make it is to have live presentations of their art, because you really can't. Well, you can recreate that with VR, I guess.
But VR is a certain thing, but it doesn't have the smell. It doesn't have the feel. It doesn't have the vibe in the room. You know, like I find that with our house concerts, a lot of people like playing them because they actually make more money at my house than they do at a bar, which isn't great. But, you know, everyone just kind of pays in when they come.
So it's like a donation bucket kind of thing?
Yeah. And the artists are always happy because they say they make more. And
I think,
great. And I think people like giving a little bit more than they would to a regular concert because it feels special.
True, right? Yeah.
You know, and I think VR concerts would be interesting, but they wouldn't have that.
Yeah, they're definitely going to be missing something, but we're going to get closer and closer to that similarity, but it's still never going to be exact.
Yeah.
But again, I think back to, like you said, these young people that are kind of born into it.
Yeah.
Are they even going to miss that?
Yeah. But they seem to be the big push for experiences, right?
Yeah.
Like it seems to be that group of people that want the parkour gyms and the, you know, ping pong bars and all these kinds of things. That's really important for them. Or even Pokemon Go, you know, going out into the streets. Like they want that.
What happened to that? That came and went really quickly.
I know, it's a shame.
Did it go, or is it still around?
I think it's still around, but I think the main push is gone.
Yeah, was it last summer? Was it last summer? It was a big deal. Yeah. Remember, went to Toronto Island and we came back off the ferry, and there was this huge crowd of young people. And at first we didn't realize what was going on, and everyone was just kind of quiet. Yeah. And, you know, hundreds of them just kind of looking down and go, what's going on here? And someone said, Pokemon Go. Oh, it was a weird kind of a zombie kind of thing going on there, because you literally had 200-300 people just kind of looking at their screens and not talking to each other.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's kind of a social thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they're at least they're outside.
Yeah. Well, you heard stories about people sort of talking and having friendships and
You
dating
gotta
and
think,
things
right?
like that for meeting people,
Yeah.
which was nice.
Chances are, if you
Yeah.
put together a few hundred people, some of them are going to interact.
Yeah. Well, probably on a smaller scale too. Like that one's probably very particular. But if you were 3 people that were at a park and you could see that there was someone else doing the same thing, then it might be easier to talk to like 2
Right.
other people than 100.
I guess it was a gymnasium. Is that what they call it when you have a bunch of them? Yeah.
Sure.
Apparently, certain nodes are where everybody comes
Yeah.
out. And so,
Yeah.
fascinating stuff.
Yeah, we had some near where I work in places that there weren't usually people. So you'd be like, why are these people here? Which
It's
is
a
great.
zombie
but-
apocalypse.
Yeah,
upon us.
totally. Yeah.
Which hopefully is not around the corner. I think we both have optimism for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the conversation, Anthea.
Oh, thank
That
you
was
for
great.
inviting me on.
Yeah, we do a high five.
High five.
Right on. Thanks. It feels like, when we were in that section of the wellness. It feels like, when we were in that section of the wellness. It feels like, when we were in that section of the wellness. It feels like, when we were in that section of the wellness. It feels like, when we were in that section of the wellness. It feels like, when we were in that section of the wellness. It feels like, when we were in that section of the wellness. It feels like. How we gonna? This is going too fast. How we gonna? This is going too fast. How we gonna? This is going too fast. Going too fast.